dented, the radiator steams. One headlight don't work, the radio can scream. I got a sticker that says Indian power. I stuck it on a bumper, that's what holds my car together. We're on the circuit of an Indian ring. My car is dented, the radiator steams. One headlight don't work, the radio can scream. Got a sticker that says Indian power. I stuck it on a bumper, that's what holds my car together. We're on the
So on behalf of Liberated Ethnic Studies, I now hand this over to my colleague and good friend, Mary Levi.
Hello, and welcome everybody to Beyond Native American Heritage Month. So we picked the last day of November to do this, and so I'm very excited to have all of our panelists here to have a conversation and a discussion on what we do next. So Teresa, do you have the slide for the next part? We're going to start this by acknowledging we're going to start by acknowledging where we are today and what brings us here, and that we are on the traditional homelands of California's first people. Let us acknowledge their past, present, and of course their future contributions to our California culture, as well as their struggles to be resilient in passing on their words, their songs, traditions, and in caring for the land there for all we live on. I am coming to you from the lands in Rancho Cucamonga, which are in between the Tongva and the Serrano people who have walked all of these lands around us. And so if you could, in the chat, please write your name and the lands and spaces and the lives and the plant life and the animal life that you share where you are right now. And along with, and Teresa, if we could go on to, along with in Liberated Ethnic Studies, we like to bring in an ancestral acknowledgement. And I thought today this would be one of our ancestors who is near and dear to our hearts is Catherine Sobel. She is Mountain Kuia. Her livelihood was from 1920 to 2011, and she was an author, an illustrator, a spokesman. She was a chairwoman. She was a singer. She was a dancer. She was a mother. She was a sister. She was an aunt. She was. She holds a dear place in all of our hearts, and we will never forget her knowledge that she has bestowed upon all of us. And if you read her books, she is an anthropologist, an ethnologist, so she is a linguist. She is quite a wonderful woman. And so with that, and of course, let's not forget, she was the founder of the Mulkey Museum on Morongo Reservation. She was appointed a chair commissioner. She was not a chair, but a commissioner on the California Native American Heritage Commission. And she was, I can't say any more. She's just absolutely wonderful. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go to our speakers. Are we ready? So we're going to highlight a couple of speakers. I'm going to, not a couple, all four of you. And I'm in the space, by the way, so I'm going to chime in too whenever I want to say anything. That's the benefit of being the moderator. So I am thrilled to have all of you on the panel because we've listened to each other in isolation. We've talked in small groups, and it's so nice to be able to bring everybody together. So I'm going to go one by one, and I'd like you to introduce yourself and your connection to ethnic studies, Native American studies, and even students, your connections to what brings you to where you are right now. And make it short. I'm going to start with I'm going to start with Brownie, because I hear Robert all the time. So, Brownie.
Ojo Jayak, Brownie Neddeau Lechkas, Panazwa, Shishibinik, and Ibandagwas. Hello, everyone. My name is Browning. I'm an enrolled citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I'm coming. My pronouns are he, him, his, coming from the homelands of the Mechoopda Indian tribe of Chico Rancheria. I've been present in Northern California, and I come to ethnic studies. In my role at the university, I am jointly appointed as an assistant professor of elementary teacher education and American Indian Studies at California State University, Chico. And so I come to this with background as an elementary school teacher and as a university assistant professor. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome. Thank you. Andrew.
Itowi Hokisak Kusanju Jolivette Kipo Blusa Takpa Ishak Yakti Ishak. It's so good to be with everyone here. I come from the San Francisco Yelamu territory, and I'm in Kumeyaay territory right now at UC San Diego, professor and department chair of ethnic studies and director of Native American Indigenous Studies.
Wonderful. Thank you. Gerald.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gerald Clarke Jr. I'm a professor of ethnic studies at UC Riverside, and I am talking to you today from my family's home here on the Cahuilla Indian Reservation, which is located in southern Riverside County. And my background is actually in the arts, but I have been teaching both secondary and then community college and university level for about 26 years.
Awesome. Robert Levi.
That's me. Anyway, hi, Miowen. I'm coming from what Mary said earlier, but she left at the Cahuilla territory here. So we'll talk about that later on with Gerald. But anyway, I'm a retired 38-year high school teacher, advanced placement, college prep, U.S. history. I've been with the CTA caucus, American Indian Alaska Native Caucus, as the chair. Also, I'm just working on right now curriculum for ethnic studies and hopefully for AB 1554. And then kind of working with Cal State San Bernardino and gaining more American Indian students to go to Cal States and become teachers. So that's where I'm coming from.
Teacher pipeline. You know what? I didn't even introduce myself. I just kind of just jumped right in, but let me introduce myself too. So I'm Mary Levi. I've been teaching about 31 years in elementary, everything from kindergarten through 5th grade now. And I've taught 4th grade for the last, so right now I got 4-5. I've taught 4th grade for the last 5 to 6 years. And and that's right now I'm currently chair of the American Indian Alaska Native Caucus for the California Teachers Association. And I've also done it on the national level with the National Education Association as well. So originally Hopi from Northern Arizona and came down to Southern California with my parents when they taught at Riverside Sherman. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and I think it's going to lead into quite the discussion. I'm hoping, but I'm going to start off by looking into ethnic studies. And as all of the districts rush into embrace or implement ethnic studies, I want to ask you, how do you see Native American studies fitting in to ethnic studies, and what do you see? I'll start with Browning.
Why am I getting the first spot every time?
Oh, should I
Every
give you
time.
like the first person gets the pass and then boom?
Oh, okay. I'll
That is
start,
fair.
but I'll graciously give the next question to the next person to go first. Um, so how I see Native studies fitting into ethnic studies is, I believe, well, American Indian studies, Native studies needs to underscore political identity and citizenship. And when thinking about ethnic studies, I think American Indian studies helps people explore race, ethnicity, and sovereignty. And in my opinion, we need to move away from inserting American Indian identities into the social construct of race and ethnicity. And we really need to speak about sovereignty. And I think that is how Native American studies fits into ethnic studies, because we need to get away from checking a box for race, ethnicity, when we're really talking about political standing and citizenship. It's something totally different, but something that Eurocentric narratives have pushed us into as being a race or an ethnicity when we're not. And that's where I think we fit into ethnic studies. We're bringing sovereignty.
Great. And I see Andrew and I see Gerald and even Robert is like nodding. Absolutely. Andrew?
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think sovereignty is really important. The other thing I would add to that is when we look at sovereignty, you can't study ethnic studies if you don't start with the first people. So there is no ethnic studies without indigenous studies. I think that's the first place we have to start. And that's been, to be honest, I think one of the challenges, right, when we look at sort of the new initiatives that are going out in K to 12. And I know the theme for tonight was Beyond Native American Heritage Month.
Mhm.
And so it's also like, how do we do this every day and in meaningful ways? Like, I know all of us, like, people call us in November, or or maybe it's around Indigenous Peoples Day or something else. It's like, what's the everyday commitment and real, like, in resources? Like, what are you all gonna like change, whether it's the K to 12 school districts or colleges or universities, in terms of access? I'm a big proponent of MOUs, memorandums of understanding, because, and with tribes, because we're here for however many generations we may be blessed and fortunate to be here. What's the university going to do when we're not here, right? And what is their commitment? So I don't want to hear more land acknowledgements necessarily without give some land back, particularly the UC. I work at a UC. What is our commitment to giving back some of the land that was stolen?
At
So-
least space to our Native students who are there, right? At least designated spaces that are absolutely.
Here. Yeah, no, I met with a Native woman today and it was nice to chat with her. She's from the Bay Area, and just, that was one of the things we said was, where are the spaces, and really doing more again than just sort of saying we acknowledge that people who were here. And then I saw a funny comic who had said, oh, it was a spoof on we want to acknowledge the first people of this land. And then they went on with the show, and the audience member raises the hand and says, so what are we going to do? We did all these horrible things. Are we giving money or the proceeds from this event? And so it really highlighted the lack of seriousness with which a lot of people, institutions take this. So yeah, so I think we have to start with Indigenous studies if we're going to do ethnic studies seriously.
Robert or Gerald,
Robert or
you want to
Gerald.
toss it up, or
Robert or Gerald. I'll go. Yeah, ethnic studies, because I'm coming from a high school. I'm coming from the K through 12 area, and all you other guys are up higher. You get the kids I teach, but my ethnic studies experience going into Native American studies, going to ethnic studies, is when I taught advanced placement, at the very end of the year, you would have a 5-week lag. And then that 5 week, I developed a Native American history unit that I put together from San Diego State, Long Beach, Irvine, UCR. And the kids loved it. I mean, the rigors of AP and also the rigors of college prep, believe it or not, they would stay in the class just to go to UCR's powwow. That was a culmination of the unit. And so, that's the first taste that they can get of ethnic studies. And now, since ethnic studies is going to be a graduation requirement, they've got a little bit of head start. And hopefully that ethnic studies component, I'm trying to get a Native American teacher to teach that portion of it, or at least be there to help a non-Indian teacher teach that component part of it. Because again, like I've just had this spinning in my brain about how non-Indians can sympathize, but they can't empathize. They don't know they don't know us. I mean, if you heard the music that I kind of played over, my wife's talking, is that those are Akuya bird songs. And those are what my father and 3 other elders back in 1980 revitalized. And now we have this renaissance of bird singing all over. Today down at the Koopa Cultural Center, Wayne Nelson, which was a student of my father's, is performing bird songs from their classmates down there. And again, that's, all this is going to fit into that whole idea about bringing more ethnicity into the classroom. And that ethnicity for us, is going to be, California Indian or American Indian. So hopefully with those two branching out and coming together in terms of what's coming out through ethnic studies and then what's coming out through Native American studies or California Indian history, they should just blend right together. But again, my only concern is who's going to do the teaching. We need to get American Indian students, again, to get into the teaching profession, because as we all know, as teachers here, there's going to be a shortage. And, who's going to take the place of us old guys that were in there who are not going to be there anymore. And then also, I put my email in the chat. So if anybody has anything that they want to talk more about later on, because we always run out of time, feel free. I'm retired. So as long as I'm not doing stuff for Mary, I have time to myself, which is about maybe 10 minutes of the day. Okay, Gerald, go ahead.
Well, I like what I'm hearing. I'm probably preaching to the choir a little bit, but I want to reiterate what Browning said. I think key is the topic of sovereignty, but also our unique status as tribal citizens in this country. We're not simply just another ethnicity. And I think even with ethnic studies, I don't think that's really understood, our unique legal and political status within this country. And I think that has to kind of be stated initially before, because let's face it, there's what is included is some cultural sprinkling in various classes. But I think this is the foundation, is tribal sovereignty and identity as a legal and political status. And then from there, then you can build out from that. And so, I think ethnic studies, what I believe, and I teach in a very interdisciplinary department. And I think that we're moving beyond what has formerly been termed the 4 food groups: African American, Asian American, Latinx or Chicano American, and then the Native American. And that we're starting to focus more and more on the intersectionality, right, of all these different experiences. And ultimately what I teach in my classes is Native American history is American history, right? And so I remember some of you probably, Robert, you're talking about being older and retired, but I remember the late 90s when everything was multicultural. And I was asked to teach a class that lasted the entire year on American art history. And then I was given 1 semester to do the rest of the earth, and so that's kind of common that's been going on. And, I want to see ethnic studies as a separate class, but I also want to see this subject integrated into all the other subjects, because like I said, American Indian history is American history.
Yeah, just like California Indian history is California history. I mean, you can't tell a story halfway. We need to tell it, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And then we get feedback about, oh, it's CRT, it's social justice too much. We're just telling our side of the story for once,
Well, and it's particularly the emergency, the environmental emergency that we're in the world today, right now. Traditional ecological knowledge here in California, that's science. That doesn't have to be simply talked about in ethnic studies class. It can be brought out into other disciplines. And it's something, my students, so I get them at the university level and I teach them these things and they're angry. The students are angry. They're like, well, how come we weren't told this way? I appreciate their anger. I certainly do, And so when I talk about my classes, I talk about the indigenous intellectual tradition. And many of my students have never heard those three words put together because of the way that Native studies has been taught, historically.
Yeah, same with Browning. When Browning and I first met, he was doing a presentation for CCSS, and it said field tested. I'm going, oh my God, I've never seen that before. Because usually what comes down from curriculum writers is they just put together a bunch of gobbledygook stuff and say this should work. And we know as teachers, when I've got the best lesson plan, I'm going to go in there and present it to them. It's going to be they're going to love this thing, and it just falls flat in your face. But with Browning, that stuff, I mean, it works. I mean, I can sit there going, yeah, I can see Mary doing this. And then, all the steps that he was going through, and even the people, the participants, they loved it too. And so we just had a great time, bouncing off of each other. The first time we met, we're bouncing off each other in this presentation, and all the ladies had fun with it. I think they took away a lot. So it's again the writing and the telling of our stories. That's all it is.
Which goes back to what, and I know that all of you are in higher ed, even, I even say Robert's in higher ed because they're higher than the elementary level that I'm in, and where Brownie and I, came from, except for Brownie went up to the higher ed. But it is something that we need to also consider that needs to come all the way down to kindergarten. It's not just a higher ed issue. It's not just a high school issue. It's not just a junior high. It should come all the way down to elementary, and it should start in kindergarten or preschool, because kids know when you read legends to them, like from the Pomo tribe about how the ocean started, that that it makes sense to them, and they get it when you start talking about environmental emergencies, about what we need to do to take care of our earth. And so, but Brownie, you want to talk about what you were presenting, because it sounded wonderful.
No, I don't, because I didn't know I was being judged by Robert at the time. There were several different lessons in there regarding blood quantum and understanding what that might mean, and how I think one of the ones that was in that particular one was about what do horses, dogs, and American Indians have in common, and having people think, well, I don't understand the question. And I said, that's because you don't have to live it.
So empathize, yeah.
There's that, but stories are important, and what you're mentioning, Mary, reminds me of books that we have in our classrooms. When we have books written by non-native people telling stories that maybe they're not even supposed to be telling the story.
Correct.
And then people think that's, well, I read it in the book. Who is that person? That person's not even from the community which they're writing about. Why don't we have the person from the community who tell the story? If they feel like they are the ones that are supposed to tell the story, maybe we're not supposed to even hear the story. Maybe the story is only supposed to be told during certain times of the year. So I think part of that thing, I'm so glad that Robert ended with, it was a helpful workshop. Like it was, but it was a part of it was about blood quantum and repealing and replacing the California Mission Project.
But yes, the mission projects that everybody comes around to, because that's the only piece of and I go back to Gerald too about this, because that's people feel like, oh, that's they do it, they get to build things with their hands, and and have it lasting. I, on the other hand, thought mission projects were just it took too much space, and I never even wanted to have that. So, but there are, again, Gerald. It's actually
Yeah, I was just going to say regarding the mission project, like I had something similar that happened to me when I first was hired at UCR. They asked me to teach the California Indian history class. And I was like, okay, why me? And they said, well, you're the California Indian. I said, oh, okay. And when they gave me the syllabus, the description was the rich history heritage of California Indians from Spanish contact to the 20th century. So that wasn't about California Indians. It was about European impact on California Indians. And I asked my students, do you think there were Indians here before the Spaniards? How about in the 21st century? And so I recommend for everyone on the call, be very careful, because a lot of times you'll be asked to teach a class or teach a text, which it on the surface might seem like it's solid material. When you get into it, you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is not even connected to the tribal communities that they're talking about.
Absolutely. Good point. Good point. Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on what Browning and Gerald are saying. I think the other issue here is it's not just about what we add into the curriculum when we think about Native studies and ethnic studies, it's how we teach it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the other thing is we have to change the way that where we're teaching it, the methods we're using, all of that, right? And our relationship to students, the hierarchies that get kind of created in classrooms. And I do think it's a real issue to the issue of blood quantum that Browning was talking about sometimes, that respecting the sovereign status, but also understanding too, what we're talking about mission studies or critical mission studies. But so many, like I grew up in Northern California, right? Many of the tribes here in SoCal are federally recognized. In NorCal, particularly the Ohlone people, so many who were not recognized, and what that means in terms of like relationships, and really also thinking about what is the history if we're going to make it place-based, right? Which I think is tied to the how you teach it, is really talking to local people and bringing local people in, but also understanding what those missions really were. Like we do, like I was talking about the land acknowledgements earlier, but I like to tell people we also should do labor acknowledgements. And when we do labor acknowledgements, we need to think about not just like African labor, right, and enslavement, but we also need to think about that those missions were plantations. They were essentially this similar to plantation, and we don't talk about that the cultural genocide that was also taking place in those missions to transform and change people, but also the labor that was used to build this state. And so when I think about the state standards, the liberated ethnic studies model curriculum, all these different sort of proposals, are we starting, again, I'm going to keep repeating this probably all night, if we're not starting with California natives, it's not right. It's not right. And so I think we have to pay attention not just to, again, content, but also approach and methods that we use in the classroom.
Yeah, I agree, Andrew. 100%. I agree. Also, when you're talking about land acknowledgement, the issues that we're having at Cal State Long Beach with the Tongva there, trying to get some of their land back, that Cal State Long Beach is very adamant about not giving it back or let them use it. And then also down, I'm a graduate from San Diego State, and we got that big, just terrible argument about getting rid of the Aztec, and that's supposedly supposed to be coming up in January. This will have the new mascot icon coming in. I haven't heard anything back from the American Indian Studies Department about that issue. But I mean, it's just something that you just can't ignore. We just got to, again, going back to what Joe was talking about sovereignty and Browning too, and I promise you, Teresa and Lupe, I will have that that lesson plan in on the California or the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. I promise I'll get that to you. But I'm doing a lesson for high school about the Citizenship Act that shows how different we are. We've got citizenships of whole different governments, from local to the feds. And there's some things I might include in there too. Now I'm thinking more about it. But anyway, I mean, you guys are absolutely right.
So that leads on to, we're only on the second question now. And that leads into, so what are the key focuses then? I mean, because we have key focuses, and I think we kind of already touched upon them, of what Native American curriculum in ethnic studies need to be. I mean, if we're going to have this, we're going to have a Native, we have to have a component of it. I'm hearing sovereignty. It has to be a key component of the curriculum. Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm going to let you think. Then I'm going to go.
Well, I was just putting a comment. I'll just say briefly, because I was responding actually about the Citizenship Act, and which took so long, right? Even after 1924, what was it? 10, 12, how many more years later before it actually went into, was actualized, really was policy. But I think Gerald was the one mentioning the class at Riverside. Why are we all so much starting from and I feel like that too when I teach my classes, and I did work in K-12 too for a bit, but it's also a lot of times Native studies feeling like you're responding to whiteness or white Native relationships, and how do we actually get out of that and actually center Indigenous knowledge or California Indian knowledge, if we're talking, again, trying to focus on place specific, because I think that is really important. If we were in Minneapolis, maybe we're talking about Anishinaabe or something else, but I think that's really important. So I think, how do we center Indigenous knowledge, I think, is the other really important component of this work.
And knowing that our public schools right now currently house not just our tribal members, local tribal members, but we have many, many tribes represented in our public schools that are outside of California. So, and knowing that, even still as a guest to the land and everything, I still should know California Native history. And so that is, I'm a guest here. I mean, I call it home, but it's also not where I was from, right? So, Gerald, you have.
Yeah, I would just add, and Andrew, I appreciate that comment as well. And Guillermo, I saw your up in the chat about asking about Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's text, and I've actually used that book previously. Although I have to say, I think much of that book actually does center, right, the American colonial impact on tribes, and I wish it was a little more tribally centered. And that's why I think you have to be very careful that maybe something on the surface you might think this is what's going to fit the bill. When you get into it, then you begin to recognize that a lot of times the Native story and going back to pedagogy and how we conduct our classes, I'm storytelling. Storytelling is not a pastime. Storytelling is the handing down of knowledge. And so I don't know what my students think of me, but I tell a lot of stories in class and they seem to appreciate it. And you just have to constantly remind them that there's knowledge there. There's an intellectual tradition that's being handed down that way. And so it's tricky. And I'll just say, I'm a huge advocate. I think teaching's the hardest job in the world, and we're asked to do so much. And we're not just educators, we're entertainers, and we're rewarded for keeping the students' attention. And sometimes that can go off the rails, like we saw a couple of weeks ago in Riverside. Yeah. And but what I fear is that administrations are just going to dump more and more requirements on teachers. You got to fit this in, you got to fit that in. And that's why, I want to see it as a separate class, but I also want to see these ideas integrated into other subjects, because it's there and it's important. Like I said, the ecological knowledge that could be brought into the natural sciences, right? Certainly our story could be brought into the California history or American history as well.
Absolutely. Brownie?
Love all the ideas that are shared so far, especially storytelling. I love storytelling, and it's very important for many, in many ways. Some of the key takeaways I think should be in American Indian Studies or Native Studies would be honoring place, understanding place, tribal sovereignty, as we've mentioned in treaties, and cultural survivance, I think, is something that needs to be included. And in understanding stories, we also need to understand language. So language is central to understanding our stories, as the stories weren't in English. So the teachings aren't in English, and their interpretations of the stories. So we need to understand the language. And when we start to understand the language, we understand maybe a little bit more about the differences in the cultural ways of knowing and doing too. But the challenge is with language revitalization efforts, it takes time and commitment to learn a language.
Mhm.
And some people are so fast at wanting to learn all these things about language when it just takes time, and you need to invest the time. And it's when you invest the time in the language that you'll truly understand the stories. And so I think a takeaway in American Indian Studies and ethnic studies is that we need to honor that we're reading in our classrooms, in our K through 12 classrooms, interpretations of stories, is so it can have a wider audience that can understand reading in English or hearing in English. But it's not the original story. The story has been changed and interpreted to be in English so more people will hear the story. So I think that's something that needs to be underscored when thinking about American Indian Studies and ethnic studies, that we're trying to reach a larger audience, but we're losing some things at the same time that are very essential to understanding American Indian Studies.
Mhm. There's some the essence. Some of the essence is a little lost because of the way it transforms. I'm gonna kind of like bird walk a little off of, especially with stories, because all of you have a uniqueness to your stories. I know Brownie really engages people in developing stories. I mean, he's done lessons with kids to even develop their stories. And Gerald does a lot of storytelling, not just telling stories, but also through his art. And he and of course, we are all brought up, having stories told to us, and also songs like Kauai bird songs or our own traditional songs that we have. But I kind of want you to like touch on the heart of stories that you bring, Gerald, through your art, if you could, and how you tie that into your environmental emergency.
Well, so I would answer that in two ways. Like in my classroom, a lot of the stories I tell are from personal experiences, and by putting my own experiences, my own life into the classroom, I've got, I'm making this personal, and by making it personal, I think it makes it meaningful, right? And so I'll tell stories from just my own experiences or what have you, and then those same stories, like. So for the participants and such, I'm a professional artist. I have shows around the country or whatever, and I don't do Native American art. What I do is I do art as a Kauai man in the 21st century and looking through a Kauai lens on the world. So everything I do is Native American art in a way, but it's not what people expect. And so I think that authenticity, to be honest with you, I think the mainstream America has a hunger for authenticity. They don't know where to find it. They don't know what it looks like. And so they're spoon-fed this kind of pan-Indian generic story and image that I think there's a lot of people who want that to go to the source. They just don't know how to begin. And I think teachers also, where do you find? We often, when I meet with teachers, they ask me, well, what book are you using? Who are you talking to? What are you reading right now? And it's a bit of a minefield, right? To find those authentic stories. And so, what was it? Andrew talked about, tapping into local communities. If you're here in California, there's a local tribal community somewhere near wherever you happen to be, and there's a huge resource that intellectual, indigenous intellectual tradition is right there, just down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert, you want to jump off of that too?
Well, usually what they come up with, like I said with Gerald, is like a two-part answer to this. One, in terms of the classroom, since we got classroom teachers here, I divide up my lesson plans or my Native American unit into five phases: pre-contact, contact, reservation, termination, and self-determination. And so when you're talking about stories, we go to the creation stories. So I tell the Hopi creation story, I tell our Kuya creation story, and the kids are fascinated, and they come to me and go, "Do you actually believe in that?" I say, "Yes, I do actually believe in that." And I tell them, talk about personal comments into what you're teaching about. I tell them I was Catholic. I've been baptized. I got the attitudes, but I know. But when I went down to state, it was just totally different. Learning more about my culture, who my background is, and then I could remember my grandfather and my dad and my Aunt Catherine talking about stories. And when they wanted me to listen, they divided talking Kuya into an English together, so we could follow what was going on. Well, I'm 64 years old now, and I'm taking Eric Elliott's Kuya class. And so I'm finding out some of the words that they were saying, we really shouldn't have known what they were talking about. But now it's just, looking at, oh gosh, Christ died for your sins on the cross. And I find out, oh, the people did that. And I'm finding out, well, in our creation story, the people did that too, to our creator. And it's just following and meshing into, we have this commonality. And again, that's, what Browning was talking about earlier, and Andrew, is you got to find that commonality about where we're coming from. And then you feel real, comfortable about talking about who you are. And they also feel comfortable about talking about who they are. At curriculum, also going to, finding local people. Powwows aren't Southern California, but, they let us sing bird songs before the powwow and then at break and then hopefully at the end. But some of my kids have never been to a powwow. And so they go and they're just fascinated by, what Plains Indians do. And then they get a little bit of that racist attitude, but I mean, not, how Indians are, well, we are. It's more of a chiding, more about, because the arena director just clears everybody out and puts my class in there and uses anywhere between 80 and even 100 kids there for my classes. And so they dance powwow, and they're asking me, well, how do I dance it? I said, don't worry about it. Somebody will teach you. And so they have to go to the powwow dancers and ask them. They should go up and ask them. They will, let you know how to do this thing. And they say, well, aren't you going to dance? I go, no, that's not who we are. That's not who I am. And so they do that, and then they get that feeling about, all these Indians are looking at them. And Miss Levi, I felt that. I felt kind of awkward. I felt kind of not balanced. And I'm going, well, now you know how we feel. And so, they have fun. They have, the first fry bread experience, the first Indian taco experience. But again, it's a teaching, it's a learning. It's the stories that goes about what they can learn at that powwow. And then now, since I'm on Facebook, I get kids going, I really learned a lot in your class, but the best thing I got was the powwow. I'm going, oh. So, every university has a powwow. I can't think of any one university that doesn't have a powwow. But again, that's that whole idea about storytelling, our songs are just migration songs. They're not about birds per se. They're about, we came down, they had to go around the North American continent and then try to find a place where the people wanted to settle. And then they came over San Jacinto Mountain and boom, there was a Coachella Valley. Well, this is where we're going. And so, I explained that to the kids. And again, the Hopi creation story, the Navajo creation story, the Cherokee, the Creek creation story. And they, the ascending, coming out of the earth, coming down the earth. And, and that it's just like at all in terms of what the stories can tell them about who they are. And then you feel a lot better going on into now you get terminated. Now you get genocide. And so why? They didn't really understand who we were. They were afraid of us, but we're trying to get everybody to get together and know each other. And that's what ethnic studies is all about, I hope.
Very
I add
good.
one more thing onto what Robert just shared. It reminds me of a piece I was so fortunate to co-write with one of the people that's with us today in the room, Anna Pilhofer. So if you don't know her yet in Santa Barbara, she is amazing. So shout out to Anna. We wrote a piece with a column for the National Art Education Association because we're on the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Commission. In that piece, it was about culture sustaining or revitalizing pedagogies and thinking about our students are not only consumers of culture, but they're builders of culture.
Mhm.
And when Robert was talking, it was reminding me about what he explained was this culture sustaining, revitalizing pedagogies moving to this online space. What does that look like for builders of culture? And it reminded me of the social distance powwow that you might have seen online. Like that's people building culture right there. That's an example of culture sustaining, revitalizing pedagogies in regard to Indian country. So I wanted to share that really quickly there because I was really feeling what Robert was mentioning.
That's pretty awesome. Okay. Andrew, that kind of goes back to what you were you wrote in the chat about the movement from native survival and resilience to native thrivance. You want to?
Yeah, no, first I have to tell Robert, I'm like, oh, you're talking about fry bread. And I'm like, you got me hungry over here.
All this during dinner time.
Right, I know. I was like, oh, it's dinner time. And my friend, Wailaki, good fry bread. And so, no, I mean, I think, it was actually some of our Maori relatives who had pointed this out in an event I was at. They said, you remember those plastic like dolls that they had sand in the very bottom of them? And you kind of punch it and it would go down like this and it would come back up and it would go back down and up. They said, that's resilience. Why are you indigenous folks in the States like, oh, indigenous resilience, that's great. They're like, no, we want to actually do more than just stay in the same place. We want to thrive. So I think for me, I really feel like we have to start sometimes from a place too of, do we have to tell the story of, to a certain extent we do, right? Of what has happened or happened to us, but then that's starting from it's very receptive rather than sort of just speaking from our own sort of stories. And as you talked about stories, I thought about my great grandmother who was we call it tatur or a treater, a medicine person, but that there are particular instructions and ways that we might do things. And so when she treated particularly blood illnesses. And so she could only pass that to a male, and a male can only pass that to a female. I think that there's certain things that just because they're not understood by people outside of the community, maybe they don't need to understand it too. I think that's the challenge that we haven't talked about too, is that when we teach things that are specific to maybe our own community or tribe, that there's certain knowledge that you don't share outside of it, right? I think that's okay. We haven't talked about, I think, when we think about ethnic studies too, because I was teaching I remember an American Indian education class, and it was a college class, but a lot of the curriculum was about reservation schools, or they talk about the boarding school experience. What about actually what our elders teach us, right? Or what we learn just in terms of a daily kind of practice, in terms of like cultivating like plants, or the kind of food that we use, that you use what's available. Like my family that's from Louisiana, like you eat what's there, right? And you only use what you need. And so I think stories are very important, but stories had a purpose. So story without purpose is not a story anymore, right? It's not. I think that there's the lesson part too, that we have to remember, that there's a lesson in what we're doing, and it's to make us stronger, I think, or make us, not make us, I don't even think it's make us, it's to help us see a little bit better, right? To see and listen better and speak less. Sometimes, in the Western culture, I think it's talk, 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 and not really listen and hear what is around us.
Right. So in elementary school, I'm gonna go back, because in elementary school I have, I always tell Robert he has a kickback job. He teaches, he teaches 5 classes a day. Maybe he sees like 150 kids every day. So he has all of these essays to grade. But man, it's
Thanks,
one
guys.
subject. It is one subject. I plan art, I plan music, I plan history, social studies, I plan reading, I plan math, I plan my science, I plan, and some fun or PE in there too. So every single day with these kids. And then he wonders why I'm tired. But the thing is that, and Brownie would know, is that you have to make sure every single minute has meaning for the next minute that goes by. And then that follows up to the next minute or the next subject or the next thing that you're going to do, so that everything ties together. And I will say, I do remember learning that from my grandparents, my parents, my relatives, when they talk about stories, or when you go through ceremonies, or you learn this song, it's because this next month you're going to need it when you're doing planting, or you're going to need it when you're going to do this next thing. But it's always, learn this because you're going to learn it you're going to need it for the next thing you do. And that's the stories, and that's the songs, and that's the learning your food so you can have it for your meal next month, or for your meal, or for your ceremonies the next time. And I think that's when we have compartmental curriculum, like here's math here, and here's a new program for science, and here's a new program for social studies, and it doesn't tie all together. Then that's where our elementary teachers especially have the hardest part of it, is how do we get them, or how do we help them get our native curriculum tied in. And I think that's where we kind of have to, how do we build that base so that in high school they have that base, and how they have that base for college, and how do they have that as becoming citizens of California or the United States. Because everything that we do anything that is native change has to go through our legislation. And so, especially like curriculum. So any suggestions? None.
Wait, I lost the suggestions to what?
So I guess, with the current assembly bill, so I'm going to go to this
Just
one
move.
now. With the current assembly bill, 1554, which is from James Ramos down here in Southern California. he is trying to put together install California history through K through 12. And how do you see that changing? How do you see that helping? How do you see that, or do you see it helping? I hope it does help. Thank you, Trish. She just put the assembly bill in the chat.
Cool.
Gerald.
I would just say, what kind of foundation are we talking about? Are we talking about information, a foundation of information, or should we be planting the seeds of critical thinking and empathy, right, in these early years that set the stage for learning these subjects that haven't been taught historically? I think maybe that's an important thing as well. I think, for me, teaching has never been the pushing information onto, that was the thing about the internet, right? Oh, we have access to information, all the world's problems are over, right? And that's not what happened. It's what you do with that information. So I think planting those seeds of empathy and critical thinking might be the real foundation that we need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and writing that curriculum for liberal ethnic studies at Indian Citizenship Act, it always starts with a rubric. Here's the rubric, peoples. And so you just look at the rubric and the kids can figure out, well, did I meet this rubric? So, it's how you use that information to critically answer an overall question that deals with, did the Indian Citizenship Act really help, or did it help at all? How it's structured, I can't remember right offhand. The American Indian population. And so they can go, yes, it did, or yes, it didn't. And I've got documents that go along with that, the trick I learned in AP is that they gave you, 3 documents for, 3 documents against, and 1 document that you could go either way, depends on how the kids interpreted it. And as long as they had, we call it outside information, but as long as they had examples to back that up, and they met the rubric, that's how you moved up on the rubric. So, that's what I put together. And so again, it's not pushing information on them. It's like, here it is. What do you think about it? And how does that meet the overall question? And then they can discuss it back and forth that say that, yes, I agree with did, or no, I agree. It didn't cover the whole question about Indian citizenship in 1924, because that's even coming up on part of that Truth and Healing Council that Governor Newsom set forth, that we're trying to figure out, okay, the historic trauma for California Indians, let's hear some of that. How are we going to fix that? And so, looking at these lessons that I put it together for, ethnic studies, and also, I think they could double use it for AB 1554, that, it's how the kids look at different kinds of documents. And the same thing, I'm after this, hopefully I can get together with, I'm trying to do a comic book. And that's not a comic book, what they call them? Graphic novels for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because that's the area that most of the kids drop out. Most of the kids commit suicide. So that's the target area I'd like to target more. But again, we're all sitting here. Mary's the elementary. I'm the high school. I don't think we still found somebody who does junior high or the middle school. And then again, but that's the greatest need that we have. And that's coming off of that from boarding schools to suspension boards report that came out, I think it was 2019, that just gave a really clear picture of the situation for California American Indian students, that what's happening. And, both, girls have their own issues and guys have their own issues, but it's still, how do we meet that? That's what we're looking at, Gerald, about 21st century, how do we get that to get them from that that transition grades to high school to become critical thinkers that you guys need when you get to college. And again, as a critical thinking, as an educator, here's a great lesson plan. Okay, but let me tweak it. I've done that. Here's lesson plans. Let me tweak it. Or, what? I don't have time for this part. I'm just gonna leave it out. And we do that all the time. I mean, but it's what do we think is the most important in terms of getting across vital critical information to our students to make them better citizens. So
Can I add a little bit? I so agree with that. I had written in the chat earlier this quote I had heard from some folks a long time ago, like, we don't need more Indian experts, we need more expert Indians. And I had to rewrite it. I'd written it too fast. I think when we think about like the model curriculum or the liberated ethnic studies model curriculum, some of the questions that really still remain are, how are we going to make sure that there are native teachers in these classrooms, right? And then those that are not, right? Yeah, we want, like, I know even on our campus, there's conversations happening all across the state, which is great. How are we going to train people to teach ethnic studies? How are we going to train people to teach native studies? I said I was going to keep coming back to it. We have to start there. And so what do folks need to be able to do to be qualified to do that? And I think if we don't have that, we need to stop and not do it at all. To be quite blunt, we should not be doing it at all. If we don't have folks who are qualified to teach native studies, then we shouldn't be doing this. And that's the kind of, I think that's the important thing, that, because then it just continues to further the erasure that we've been kind of talking a little bit about. And I think that's what that Thrivance is about too, right? Is to really center like folks who do have that particular knowledge, but to not just tell the story of exclusion, but also the resistance, the stuff that happened before that. But I think like Illuminative, all the stuff that's happening now, Res Dogs, the filmmakers, the fashion folks, all of these things that are happening, that we highlight the magic, right? Native magic, native joy in its full existence is really important. And I think that has to be centered. But if we don't have folks, native teachers, right? And if we're not creating a native teacher pipeline, that's an issue. And then, you know, kind of secondary to that, I think if we don't have folks who are at least in that training process at the district levels across the state that are beginning from native studies, don't even do the rest. Don't even do the rest, because you're not doing ethnic studies any justice.
True. What do you see, Brownie? Because you're in the pipeline. You're in the pipe.
Yeah. To add on what I'm hearing, something that it reminds me of is it took until June 2019 for a governor of California to acknowledge the genocide of Native peoples. So perhaps Assembly Bill 1554 is an opportunity to start teaching about this instead of the bright and shiny victor kind of position that that Lowen speaks about in the book, in their writings about what your teachers told you, kind of. Can't remember the exact title right now at 6:09 p.m. But it always talks about that there might be like a misunderstanding between Native Americans and Eurocentric perspectives. And this in June 2019, Newsom opened the doors for saying that it's about genocide. We need to be teaching about that it was genocide. And now we're building from that perspective instead of looking at bright and shiny things and building these missions in our fourth grade classrooms. And we need to really rethink how we're talking about Native American studies, American Indian studies in our classrooms. As my experience is third, fourth, and fifth grade. When third grade, you're talking about local peoples. And in fourth grade, I remember in fifth grade, when I was talking about American Indians throughout the US, my students thought I was dead. And they told me it's because in the book, it says that it's all past tense. And I was like, thank you, historians. There's several historians in the room. I see one that is that works with me here. Hi, Susan. Who has known that we have this conversation. How do we move past the history books that are saying that we're not there when we're standing right in front of our students? So we have to face this concept of how do we teach history of being past, present, and future and in present tense, so our students don't think that we're dead. Because I remember when I taught 5th grade, my students were like, no, Native Americans are dead. I said, I'm standing right here. I'm literally standing right in front of you. I'm literally standing in front of you. And we can show photos for present times. Because when I taught my class, I brought in pictures of my relatives, and they were all in black and white. And my students like, oh, see, we were right. And I said, what? I brought in these because you said natives are dead. They said, yes, those are all your relatives. And I said, yes. And I looked at the photos like, oh, they're all dead. Oh, dang. So I started bringing in my things and photos of me doing things. So I think that we should, when this opportunity with AB 1554 allows us to talk about, brings us opportunity for us to talk about American Indian studies, Native American studies with our students in a different way than it has been supported throughout the state prior to that time. And also highlights the fact that I think to a certain extent, how many times in elementary schools do people say they've actually done history, social studies, or ethnic studies? We spend so much time saying we're doing English language arts and mathematics.
It's true.
When you can do the same at the same time, you can do ELA and ethnic studies at the same time. But people that I've seen and that I've worked with and experienced, they say we don't have any time for that right now. I say, well, when is a good time? Now is a good time. Now is a really good time. So that's where I think that's taking us, and I hope that has provided an opportunity. It's really unfortunate that it took until 2019 for the opportunity to be here. And you notice that it took that long for someone to stand in the gap, to be not only an ally and someone that stands by, but stands in the gap and uses their power and privilege and their positionality to say that it is cultural genocide. And we need to acknowledge that and move with that in mind.
Well, I want to say also, jumping off of that part, that since he's done that, we should also recommend to 4th grade teachers to stop doing Gold Rush, because if genocide was ever blatant, it was during Gold Rush. And so when 4th graders want to reenact the Gold Rush, you want to go, who are you acting? Who are you going to be? So which kind of miner are you? So with that, I think that, so what do we do? What do we need to do to move California beyond Native American Heritage Month? You've all laid out absolutely a great road of what of changes. So what do we do now? Where's the road going to take us? Suggestions? What do we do? How do we turn all these ideas into a reality?
Yeah, with someone just wrote in the pipeline is the pipeline for Native American teachers. And that's the way I started off this presentation or this panel, is that's what we need to do. And I'm trying my best down at Cal State San Bernardino. I thought up north, well, I think Chico or Humboldt had a pipeline way back when. And I recently found out through the Truth and Healing Council that that's not there anymore. So no one's really cranking out American Indian teachers that I know of. Maybe a university or a UC or Cal State is, or maybe a private college, but I haven't heard it. So we're trying to Cal State San Bernardino is looking into, going to the California Nations College in Palm Desert and see if we get some students to become teachers out of there. And then, the recruiters, Marisol and Mitzi, the Indian recruiters, they're trying to promote down into, 4th graders to get there. I mean, tomorrow night we've got a parent meet and greet down at the city education offices, and they're making ornaments. How much has it got to do with the Indians and ornaments? But hey, it's a way to get to know the parents. And so that, again, you guys are stressing what I began off with is we need teachers. It's systemic, and we're the ones that aren't doing anything. Like Gerald mentioned, that the teacher at John John W. North. If there was an Indian teacher there, yeah, I don't think that would have happened. It would have gone on, and she's been doing it for 10 years plus. So, issues that come up for education is that we need the people who present it. That's what we need. I mean, again, we can write curriculum and pass it down and say, this is going to work. And you know what? It doesn't work. So that'd be my push. Like that's the way I started, and that's the way I'm going to end it. So somebody else can talk about it.
Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. No, of course, I totally agree. I think one thing we could do actually is to partner with tribal colleges, right? And create a pipe. That's what some of the pipelines have worked, right? We maybe do the high school to community college to four-year universities or credential programs. But I think really partnering with tribal colleges actually would be a really smart thing to do. Reservation-based schools, because someone had asked, I think it was Christina in the chat, how do we encourage, young folks, right, to do it, at a younger age to get into? And I think making it accessible so they know it's an option, right? And that it's not a negative thing. People who said, those who can't teach, right? Actually, no, right? That quote that gets said about teachers all the time. Actually, those who are like strong teach, because it is a labor of love, right? It's a sacred responsibility. I really believe that. And I think that, creating these kind of partnerships would really be one effective way, and going to some of the, the national conferences a little bit more for some of these, organizations. So I think that might be one strategy, at least to create the pipelines. One thing to say, we need a pipeline. How do we actually create it? And I think one of the ways is to actually partner with some of the, I would say tribal colleges, because that's where we can get, Native students who are, in higher education.
And bouncing from that, and Gerald and Brownie, wouldn't you say that that's the difference between the difference between a native thought and I don't know, colonized thought? I don't know. I don't think that's what the word I say, but teachers within, and I think all of us would say teachers within our tribal are more revered. I mean, our elders are our teachers, right? And I think that the difference between, those, especially what you said, Andrew, with what I'm trying to get at is what, those who can't will teach, and look at our elders, those who can do teach. And so that's kind of our difference. Last thoughts, Gerald?
I would just, Robert brought up our creation story, and he knows too that the twin creators, they start arguing immediately, and that's a characteristic of our tribal meetings. But what are they arguing about? They're arguing about who's older, and the reason they're doing that is because the older, right, have the knowledge. And so that's a message to me that teaching is sacred, kind of like what Andrew just said. I think it's a sacred act, and it's important. But that being said, I grew up here, and I remember when I was in grad school, and my parents asked me, like, "Are you still in school?" Like, it was such an outside, kind of beyond their reality. They couldn't wrap their heads around it and such. And so some way we need to, I agree with the pipeline, and we've got to get this across to our youth that this is something that they can do, number one, but also that it's valuable and it's tied back to our traditional culture. Mm-hmm. But then in addition to the preparing of the teachers, we've got to challenge, the educational systems are being dumped on here, right? Oh, it's all your problem. But we have all kinds of cultural institutions like museums, libraries. I mean, it goes on and on. That they also, you brought up Mary, you brought up the gold rush, and over at the Autry Museum, they have in November, they have their Native American show and sale. Then as you walk from the museum to where the Indians are, there's this huge wall about the gold rush. And I'll just say one of the things I'm working on right now is I'm interested in developing a grant at UCR where I teach a class on the gold rush for one quarter, but it's team taught between myself, maybe an economist, maybe a historian, maybe a gender studies person, maybe an environmental, the gold rush, the environmental damage from the gold rush in this state was absolutely devastating. And by team teaching, I think that's more of an indigenous way of looking at a specific, idea or topic. And so we need to challenge these traditional institutions. And, ultimately we need leaders in administrations that have, and this is a word you don't hear very often, courage. We need people with courage to be willing to change how it used to be done, and to be leaders, to be actual, not politicians, but to be leaders, to lead us into, a much healthier environment in our schools.
Good. Brownie, last thoughts?
This is not my strongest thought for the whole evening, so don't remember this. That's always people remember the first thought and the last thought. So remember everything in the middle. But my pie in the sky thought is that we need to change the accountability structures in our state government. But the problem with that is that it has to go with money too, because you can get money based on your accountability measures, which are ELA and mathematics. But if there can be some kind of accountability with future policies where teachers and schools can get dollars based on teaching about California Indians and the places of which we're residing on. If there can be some kind of accountability measure created where we can ensure that, or we can at least have that in place, where then districts have to report how they're doing it in their schools.
Right.
Then I think that's one way, because, we have to be able to sit with discomfort too. People are so used to sitting with comfort because they've been doing it or they've been taught that way. So they do the same way that they've been taught before. It's not until you're forced into an uncomfortable situation that you're going to try an uncomfortable something, whatever it is. People are less likely to jump into uncomfort or discomfort. So I think by having an accountability measure in place in the state where the districts have to report how are they doing this is one way to start moving in a way where people are actually implementing American Indian studies in their ethnic studies work.
Excellent. Okay. Andrew, did you wrap up, or did I miss you? Did you have one last word?
No, I think everyone said it well. No,
I got lost in my
no. Browning. I mean, that was actually a great final thought. I mean, it's all about accountability. I agree.
It is.
Absolutely.
So with that, I'm going to send it back to Teresa.
Oh
Do
my
you
God.
understand why I love talking to all these guys?
Oh, I've spent the evening learning from all of you, and I love the idea of accountability measures for teaching truth, right? And the need for teacher pipeline. I'm incredibly grateful to all of you. I think the whole idea of moving beyond one single month and how we do that, keeping our Native American students in the forefront was a message today, and I, for one, will take it to heart. So we actually should say beyond land acknowledgements, beyond Native American Heritage Month, but the real institutionalization and respect for Native peoples of the state that we all are guests on. So I do want to say thank you to my colleagues. I can't wait for those lessons. And I want to invite you to some of our next sessions. Our next session is actually for white teachers in ethnic studies. It is called It's Not About Me. And some of our white leaders within Liberated Ethnic Studies are taking the lead on that session. And then secondly, one of the questions that we get a lot is, how do you build solidarity with white students? How do we grab that discomfort that Browning was talking about and open the doors to our white colleagues to recognize that centering the voices, the histories, the cultural, the intellectual traditions of people of color it is something that we all need to have. So on January 8th, we hope to see you at the It's Not About Me. And on January 15th, we hope to see you on Solidarity and Ethnic Studies, White Students in Ethnic Studies. And then any other ideas that you all have for Liberated to continue this work, our sessions and our institutes develop because you give us the ideas about what you need to continue to move ethnic studies forward. So let us know if there's anything that you would like to have us concentrate on as well. So again, on behalf of Liberated Ethnic Studies Monocurriculum Consortium,